Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of books that I didn't really care for by authors whose other works I really love. Hate is quite a strong word, which is what it says in the title, books I hate by authors I love. I don't necessarily hate all of these. Some of these they were maybe just not what I was hoping for. Some of them I do very passionately dislike, but that would have been a really long title. The first book I'm going to mention though is a book that I very much didn't like. Very much a personal preference thing too, and I'm very aware of it. All of these, of course, are personal preference, but the first one would be Iron Gold, which is the fourth book in the Red Rising series. The series is quite popular by Pierce Brown. It's a science fiction story that the first one often gets compared to The Hunger Games, and a lot of people feel like the second one is the saving grace for the series, the original trilogy, because it was initially 3 books, and then there was a continuation with the fourth one, Iron Gold. I actually am in, I think, the minority in feeling that I was very much gripped by this first one. I didn't love the second one, but I loved the third one. So in the end, it really worked out for me, and it's one of my favorite trilogies. I do really love it, but I am very picky with continuations of series. If you've given me an ending that I love, and then you're gonna pick up and you're gonna follow some of the same characters, I'm always really hesitant. But I had a lot of faith and trust in Pierce Brown because I saw what he was planning for the continuation, and I thought it was going to be great because I was like, you know what, that sounds really good. And then I hated it, and I felt so, again, hate's such a dramatic word. I didn't like how things went down. It follows some of the characters. I don't want to say which ones, but it does follow some of our original characters, and I just felt like those characters weren't the same people. I was describing to my friend one time how much I didn't like the continuation, and he actually thought it sounded amazing. The way it kind of sets you up is that there's a particular character who, it's almost like they become what they hated. And I do think that that sounds really amazing, but if you're gonna make me love a character, I have a hard time watching them fall and make stupid, idiotic decisions, which I feel like what the character did. And you know what? I actually went to the release party for Iron Gold. I traveled to a different state. I had my book signed. I met Pierce Brown. Didn't like the book so much that I ended up turning it in at my local used bookstore. So hopefully somebody else who loved it got a signed copy. Next up, we have some books by arguably my favorite fantasy writer, and that would be Brandon Sanderson. He's written so many of my absolute favorites. The other day, my husband was asking me, like, hey, what's an updated list of your favorites? And I just immediately started naming Sanderson books, and I was like, hold on, let me think about something else. But he's written so many books, and something I think that is really amazing that makes him stand out too to me is that he has so many brilliant ideas, and he's able to write in different age ranges, and he's able to write very different stories and very different characters a lot of the time. But sometimes I don't like the characters. There is one in particular. I wouldn't say I hate this book. I didn't love this one though, and that would be Starsight. This is the sequel to Skyward, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Follows a girl who's trying to get into this flight school that trains people to fend off aliens that are attacking her planet. I thought it was so great. I thought the camaraderie in that story was amazing. The friendships, the development, all of it was great. I definitely feel like it leaned on the younger end of young adult, which I was totally fine with. And then I read Starsight, and it felt like a lot of things from this were very similar to the first one, but just not quite as much to my liking. I also felt like there was a specific plot line in here that was very similar to something that happened in Mistborn. It was a very specific plot line where basically the character felt like maybe they could access certain power if they were in danger, so they almost like put themselves in danger, which is exactly what a character did in another one of his series. It was just a very similar thing that nobody would notice if you haven't read Mistborn multiple times like I have. So that was all very little tiny things, but there was also just some development with the relationships between different characters that I felt like either we had an absence of in comparison to the first one, or the development wasn't really what I was hoping for in this one. Overall, I think it just maybe has a little bit of middle book syndrome. It opened up the world and it explored the world more, but I feel like almost as a trade-off to the character-focused stuff that I prefer so much more, so it just wasn't as likable for me as Skyward, which knocked it out of the park, but I'm definitely excited for the next one. I'm actually going to stick with Sanderson for a second. Again, he's written so many things that I love, but one thing I don't love, and I am so in the minority on this, is Mistborn's Secret History, which is something that I can't even really tell you the plot of without spoiling something from the original Mistborn trilogy. But again, just like with Red Rising, if you give me an ending that I really love, I want to leave it alone. I do not want this behind the scenes extra stuff that, hey, guess what, you're gonna get like bonus material. I don't really want that, and that's kind of what you get. And there's this one particular scene in Mistborn Secret History that is the reason that I didn't end up liking it. It's a very specific scene. It has to do with some character deaths, and those deaths were so impactful for me in the actual trilogy, and then it turned into this kind of like family reunion feeling scene that I was like, why? I don't like this. This one, it felt kind of cheesy. If you watch a lot of my videos, you've probably been expecting me to say Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson, because I very, 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 very much did not like Steelheart. This is one that follows a young man in kind of like our world that was overrun with superheroes gone bad. It's a great concept. I think that it has one of the strongest openings of any Sanderson book. I was immediately gripped. I was so invested. And then the more the book went on, the more it felt like a caricature of teenage boys. And I'm constantly saying I wish there was more male protagonists in young adult fantasy and more male authors, because I think it's such a specific part of growing up is learning to embrace you, who you are, and I think something as simple as your gender is a huge part of that. There's a character in the story who even the adult men in the story are like encouraging the teenage boy to sexualize. Like at one point they make jokes about, hey, you should like check out her chest because it'll be funny when she gets mad at you. When you have a grown man saying that to a teenager, it's like the person they're talking about is also a teenage girl. And it just felt very uncomfortable. The ending of the book, so much of the way that things turned out was so similar to how things went about in Mistborn that I was like, I felt like I had already read the story, but better with Mistborn. I just really didn't care for Steelheart. I do want to add, though, that I love the character Joel from The Arithmetist. This is a different young adult middle grade story by Sanderson, and I highly recommend it if you are looking for a great younger story with a male protagonist and a male author, because Joel is a sweetheart of a character who you can't help but get behind. You just root for him so much. He just so badly wants to be able to participate in the magic that people have in their world. The magic is interesting. The friendship he develops with another character is great. His relationship with family is great. Mentor figures is great. I loved this one. So I think that if you're looking for something that has a great male protagonist in young adult, this one fits it. Next up, we have a book that, once again, hate is way too dramatic of a word to describe this book. I do not hate it. I was just expecting something different, and that would be The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. First Law is a trilogy that I have a love-hate relationship with. I'm a very character-driven reader, and I personally feel this is a very character-driven story. Once I got to know the characters, I fell in love. I think it's some of the best character work I've ever seen, and some of the best morally gray characters. But I always found that it kind of meandered, and I was actually really okay with that, because I'm like, I just want to follow these characters wherever they go and hear what they're thinking, especially Glokta. Logan Ninefingers is awesome. Giselle is such an annoying character that you kind of like come around to. I did expect some of the questions that had arose in the first two books to be answered in a very interesting and fascinating way in this third one. And I kind of just felt like some of the reveals were pretty obvious. And I was like, well, yeah, I kind of thought that guy was self-motivated and had selfish intentions and maybe was a little bit of a bad guy. Like, that was what I was expecting about some of the characters. Not really a fault of the story in an objective way, like, for a fact, the ending's bad. It's not like that. It's just, I mean, it's not like a powerful, like, oh my gosh, that ending, I'm gonna be thinking about it for ages. It's not really that kind of an ending. Next up, we have Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is actually one where I would say I very much disliked this book, but I don't know if I would say I love this author because I haven't read enough of her works. I've only ever read, besides Uprooted, the first book in her Temeraire series, which I did like, and it's more that I love. She seems cool. The author seems really cool. I thought Temeraire was enjoyable. Cool concept. It's dragons during the Napoleonic era. Awesome. The thing that I fell in love with was the dragon. Temeraire is the most precious thing. Basically, if those of you are out there fans of Sanderson and love Syl from Stormlight Archive, imagine if Syl was a baby dragon, right? That's basically the dragon in Temeraire. So precious, and is like, why can't we just go, like, kill pirates? And, like, he's so, like, innocent when he asks it, but then his handler's like, no, Temeraire, we can't just go kill pirates. And it's, like, weirdly adorable. Ugh, he's so cute. I loved that. Uprooted, very different. I really enjoyed the folklore elements in Uprooted. I thought they were so fascinating. It follows this girl who kind of grows up in this somewhat poor village that is next to this very creepy forest, and the forest has got some weird stuff going on, and it was genuinely scary. And there is this individual who is a magic user. He's this wizard, and he kind of protects the village from this creepy forest. But he also, in exchange, kind of takes a lady from the village, and they are whisked off to his tower, and then one day they reappear, and they're like, I'm fine. And then they go off and live better lives. So people are like, I don't really know what happens up there, but I guess it's a fair trade-off, because the creepy forest can't kill us, and also these girls seem to turn out fine, so I guess it's a good deal. I was expecting to follow a character that is taken by this wizard, and then you find out all sorts of interesting, dark, deep secrets, and you find out what the heck goes on when you're in the tower, and I thought it was going to be a really interesting, like, mentor relationship, and with great folklore elements. And that's, I felt like, not really what you get. Agnieszka, our main character, is kind of, I feel like she's one of those rough around the edges characters that's hard to root for, because sometimes she's just so clueless, and you feel bad for her because she's used to genuine interactions between nice small town folk, and she's not really used to the politicking and maneuverings of the upper class people in the magic world and royalty and things like that, and so she gets taken advantage of, and it's kind of sad. But then there's just some weird stuff that goes on in this story. For example, at one point, somebody of high status basically tries to force themselves on her, and she defends herself, and you're like, yeah, good job, Agnieszka, that's what that guy deserved. And then, like, a different guy is giving her a hard time because he's like, oh, geez, you couldn't have just let it happen. It would have been so much more convenient for me. And he gives her a hard time, and I'm like, well, what a jerk. And that's just a jerk character, right? I'm like, okay, I can also hate this guy now. Except for Agnieszka doesn't, and I'm like, and then things play out weird. I don't know. I didn't like that. Also, a big thing in the story is that magic has always kind of been done a very specific way, and Agnieszka is kind of discovering that maybe magic can be used in other ways. But as a result, all the rules that every magic user thought were in existence turns out can be broken. And I think that's a cool concept, except for, as the reader, it just feels like the magic can be tapped into and used to solve any problem whenever, and I'm not actually somebody who needs a really hard magic system with very set, clear rules. I don't mind magic that's very magical, and maybe sometimes is a hint convenient. I'm okay often with different kinds of magic systems, but this one was just, it felt so convenient sometimes to where the stakes they didn't feel very high. The last book on this list, I would say I feel quite similarly to as I did with The Last Argument of Kings, where it's not that I hated it, it's just that I was hoping the ending would maybe be a little more a certain direction and it wasn't necessarily, and that's The Queen of Nothing. This is the last book in the Cruel Prince trilogy, Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black. The first book, I was like, man, a lot of people really like this, and it's like, okay. I just didn't love it, but I was interested enough to pick up the second one, and I thought the second one was so fun. The story follows a girl who is mortal, and she's raised essentially by immortal fae, and she's looked down upon for being human, but she has the most bizarre, twisted relationships with everybody, whether it's her sister or her father. I just think that every relationship was really twisted and really dark, and it was interesting to see how all of that played out. The fae can't lie, but our main character Jude can, and so she kind of is finding power in that ability. And I thought that was kind of a cool setup. I thought the fae elements were interesting. First one, like I said, wasn't my favorite. Second one, thought was so fun. I felt like Holly Black really tapped into that element of the fae can't lie, but they can definitely word things in a way that is misleading, and I really liked that. It made the politics so fun. I wasn't always expecting the way things were gonna go, and I liked that. And then the third book, I was just expecting to take what we had developed in that second book and then expand on it in this third one, especially with how the second book ended. And then this third one was just kind of, it was very fairy tale-like, which is a big thing that I think is a part of the story, but to me it was like a zoomed in version of a fairy tale where you're following a very specific character and their role in this world that feels very fairy tale-like, but dark. And then in the last one, it just kind of was like, and this is the end, and it was all right. That's it for some books that I didn't absolutely love, but are by authors whose other works I have thoroughly enjoyed. Any reviews I have for these, I will have them linked down below, as well as any other videos that maybe have to do with these particular stories. But anyway, let me know what are some books that you maybe don't love, but you honestly usually love everything by the authors of those books. But I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys later. Bye.